Amara Thompson had spent 2 years being invisible at La Couronne, serving champagne to billionaires who never even knew her name. But when tech mogul Edward Hale arrived with his elegant deaf mother Margaret, something shifted in the air. The staff whispered nervously, unsure how to serve a woman who couldn't hear their practiced pleasantries, while Edward dismissed his mother's condition with cold indifference. As Amara approached their table with trembling hands, she made a split-second decision that would change everything. Because hidden beneath her shy exterior was a secret she'd kept for years. Fluent sign language passed down from her deaf grandmother. The moment Amara's hands began to move in greeting, Margaret's eyes widened with joy, Edward's face darkened with suspicion, and somewhere in the shadows, a man in an expensive gray suit lowered his newspaper to watch. None of them knew it yet, but this simple act of kindness would expose corporate betrayal, family secrets, and a conspiracy that threatened billions. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today, and if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed. The dinner rush at La Couronne was always overwhelming, but tonight felt different. Amara Thompson adjusted her crisp white server's uniform for the third time, her fingers trembling slightly as she watched the elegant crowd fill the restaurant's gilded dining room. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows across marble floors, and the soft clink of expensive silverware created a symphony she'd grown accustomed to over her 2 years here. Yet she never quite felt like she belonged. At 26, Amara had learned to become invisible in spaces like these. Her dark skin seemed to absorb the golden light rather than reflect it, and she perfected the art of moving between tables without drawing attention. That was how she preferred it. Keep your head down, do your work, collect your tips, go home to Marcus. Her younger brother was counting on her to pay his college tuition, and La Couronne paid better than anywhere else she could work without a degree. "Thompson, you're on table 12 tonight," barked Gerald, the floor manager, his face perpetually pinched as if he'd bitten into something sour. "VIP guests. Don't mess this up." Amara nodded silently, already feeling her stomach twist. VIP usually meant demanding, entitled, and quick to complain. She'd been yelled at for water being too cold, bread being sliced too thick, even for walking too loudly in her regulation shoes. But she endured it all with a quiet grace that her grandmother would have been proud of. Through the kitchen's swinging doors, she heard the whispers starting. The staff was buzzing about something, clustering near the service station with barely concealed excitement. Edward Hale just walked in, breathed Jessica, one of the hostesses. The actual Edward Hale. Net worth over $3 billion, they say. Amara's hands stilled on the water pitcher she was preparing. She knew the name, of course. Everyone in the city knew about the young tech mogul who'd built his empire before turning 35. The newspapers painted him as brilliant but ruthless, a man who could destroy careers with a single phone call. The kind of person who saw service workers as furniture that occasionally moved. "He's with someone," Jessica continued, craning her neck to see through the porthole window. "An older woman. Elegant. Looks like money from birth, you know the type." Chloe Brennan, another waitress who never missed an opportunity to assert her seniority, pushed past Amara with a sneer. "I should be handling their table. I've been here 3 years longer than Thompson." Her blonde ponytail swished as she marched toward Gerald, no doubt to argue her case. But Gerald was already heading Amara's way, his expression unusually nervous. "They specifically requested the corner table in your section." The woman pointed right at it. "Just be perfect, understood? This man could buy this restaurant 10 times over if he wanted." Amara gathered her composure, picking up her order pad and a fresh pitcher of water. As she approached table 12, she got her first clear view of the pair. Edward Hale looked exactly like his photos. Sharp cheekbones, perfectly styled dark hair, a suit that probably cost more than she made in 3 months. His eyes were a cold steel gray, scanning the room with the calculated precision of someone always looking for the next advantage. He sat rigidly, his fingers drumming impatiently on the white tablecloth. But it was the woman across from him who drew Amara's attention. Margaret Hale carried herself with a different kind of power, quieter, more refined. Her silver hair was swept into an elegant chignon, pearl earrings catching the light. She must have been in her 60s, but her face held a timeless quality. Her eyes, the same gray as her son's but somehow warmer, moved carefully around the room, taking in details others might miss. As Amara approached, she noticed something else. The way Margaret's gaze fixed on people's lips when they spoke. The slight delay in her responses to her son's words. The hearing aids, expensive and discreet, barely visible beneath her carefully styled hair. "Good evening," Amara began softly, setting down the water pitcher. "Welcome to La Couronne. I'm Amara, and I'll be—" "Speak up," Edward interrupted sharply, not looking at her. "And bring the wine list. The real one, not the tourist version." His mother hadn't moved, hadn't acknowledged Amara's presence. Edward made a dismissive gesture toward her. "Don't bother addressing her. She won't hear you anyway." The words hung in the air like ice. Amara saw the slight flinch in Margaret's shoulders, the way her fingers tightened on her Hermes purse. This wasn't the first time her son had dismissed her so casually. That much was clear. Other servers might have simply nodded and retreated. The old Amara might have too. But something about Margaret's quiet dignity, the way she held her head high despite her son's callousness, stirred a memory. Her grandmother, sitting at their kitchen table, her weathered hands moving gracefully through the air, teaching Amara a language that lived in gesture and expression rather than sound. Before she could second-guess herself, Amara stepped into Margaret's line of sight. Her hands rose, moving with a fluidity she hadn't used in years. "Good evening, Mrs. Hale. Welcome to La Couronne. I'm Amara, and I'm honored to serve you tonight." The transformation in Margaret's face was immediate and stunning. Her eyes widened, lips parting in genuine surprise. For a moment, she seemed frozen, as if unable to believe what she was seeing. Then, slowly, her hands rose from her lap. "You sign." Margaret's movements were elegant, refined, each gesture deliberate and clear. "How wonderful. It's been so long since anyone in a place like this could speak with me properly." Edward's water glass hit the table with a sharp clink. He leaned forward, his expression shifting from boredom to suspicion in an instant. "What are you doing?" His voice carried an edge that made nearby diners glance over. "I'm greeting your mother, Mr. Hale," Amara replied quietly, keeping her voice steady despite her racing heart. She turned back to Margaret, signing as she spoke. "Would you prefer to see tonight's specials? Our chef has prepared some exceptional dishes." Margaret's smile was radiant. She signed back enthusiastically, her movements becoming more animated. "Yes, please. And tell me, where did you learn? Your signing is beautiful, not like the choppy movements most hearing people make." "My grandmother was deaf," Amara signed, a sad smile crossing her face. "She raised me after my parents died. Said sign language was like dancing with your hands. It should flow like water, not jump like a frightened rabbit." Margaret laughed, a soft, breathy sound that seemed to surprise even her. Edward sat back in his chair, his jaw tight, as he watched the exchange. His mother hadn't smiled like this in months, maybe years. And it was because of a waitress? This nobody who served overpriced food to people who barely noticed her existence? The restaurant around them had gone quiet. Other diners were watching now, whispering behind their hands. Some pulled out phones, discreet but obvious. It wasn't often you saw something like this at La Couronne. A server communicating fluently with a patron everyone else had written off as unreachable. "How long have you worked here?" Margaret signed, her eyes bright with interest. 2 years, Amara responded, adding, "It helps me support my younger brother through school. He's studying engineering." Edward studied engineering too. Margaret signed, glancing at her son with an expression that mixed pride and disappointment. Before he decided building empires was more interesting than building bridges. Amara translated without thinking, then immediately regretted it when she saw Edward's face darken. "I don't need you to interpret my mother's commentary," he said coldly. "Just take our order." "Edward." Margaret's voice was soft but firm. She rarely spoke aloud, but when she did, it commanded attention. "This young woman is the first person in months who's treated me like I have thoughts worth hearing." You will be polite. The tension at the table was thick enough to cut. Amara stood frozen between them, her order pad clutched in her hands. Around them, the restaurant continued its elegant dance. Servers gliding between tables, soft jazz playing from hidden speakers, candles flickering in crystal holders. But at table 12, a different kind of drama was unfolding. What would you like to start with? Amara signed to Margaret, trying to defuse the situation. Margaret's response was swift and warm. You choose for me, dear. I trust anyone who signs with such grace to have excellent taste. From the corner of her eye, Amara noticed something that made her skin prickle. A man at a table near the window, dressed in an expensive charcoal suit, had lowered his newspaper. He was watching them intently, a small camera phone angled their way. When he saw Amara looking, he raised the paper again, but not before she caught the calculating look in his eyes. Is everything all right? Margaret signed, noticing Amara's distraction. Yes, of course. Amara signed back, though unease settled in her stomach. I'll bring your appetizers right away. As she turned to leave, she heard Edward's low voice. I don't like this. You don't like that someone else can talk to me? Margaret signed sharply, knowing he could understand basic signs even if he rarely used them. I don't like surprises, he responded aloud, his eyes following Amara's retreating form. And that girl is surprising. 20 minutes later, Amara returned with a carefully selected array of appetizers. Her hands were steadier now, though she could feel Edward's gaze tracking her every movement. She'd chosen dishes that were easy to eat while conversing, nothing that required too much attention or created awkward pauses. These look wonderful, Margaret signed, her delight genuine. You have excellent taste, just as I suspected. Edward picked up his fork with obvious irritation. I suppose you're going to translate every trivial thing she signs now. He directed this at Amara, his tone dismissive. Only if you'd like me to, sir, Amara replied carefully, setting down the last plate. What I'd like, Edward said, leaning back in his chair with studied casualness, is to understand why a waitress in a place like this happens to know fluent sign language. Seems rather convenient, doesn't it? The accusation hung between them. Margaret's hands moved sharply. Edward James Hale, you will not interrogate this young woman like she's one of your business rivals. I'm simply curious, mother. Aren't you? What are the odds that our server tonight just happens to have this particular skill? His smile was cold, predatory. In my experience, coincidences rarely are. Amara felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she kept her voice level. I've worked here for 2 years, Mr. Hale. You can check with management. I've never served your mother before, because this is the first time she's dined here during my shifts. She turned to Margaret, signing as she spoke. I learned sign language when I was 4 years old. My grandmother lost her hearing in an accident at the factory where she worked. She raised me and my brother after our parents died in a car accident. Margaret's expression softened. She reached out and briefly touched Amara's hand, a gesture that made Edward's jaw clench. You've had loss in your life. It shows in your eyes, but also strength. Mother, please don't. Don't what? Margaret signed fiercely. Don't treat someone with kindness? Don't have a real conversation for the first time in months? You bring me to these places and expect me to sit like a decoration while you conduct business calls. From across the dining room, Amara could see Chloe watching with barely concealed jealousy. The senior waitress had been trying to get assigned to high-profile tables for months, and here was Amara, not only serving the Hale family, but actually engaging with them. Chloe whispered something to another server, her expression venomous. If you'll excuse me, Amara said, starting to step back. I'll let you enjoy your appetizers. No, Margaret signed firmly. Stay. I want to hear more about your grandmother. What was she like? Edward sighed dramatically. Mother, she has other tables to attend to. Actually, Gerald appeared as if from nowhere, his usually stern face attempting something like a smile. Amara, you're relieved from your other tables tonight. You'll serve the Hales exclusively. He disappeared as quickly as he'd come, clearly not wanting to risk Edward's displeasure. Amara caught the flash of triumph in Margaret's eyes. Now, then, tell me about your grandmother. Was she as lovely as you? She was fierce, Amara signed, a genuine smile crossing her face. She said losing her hearing just meant she could see the world more clearly. She taught me that silence isn't empty. It's full of things most people are too loud to notice. Your grandmother was wise. Margaret signed back. I lost my hearing gradually. First the high frequencies, then the low ones. My husband. She paused, her hands hesitating. He saw it as a deficiency. Edward's father believed in perfection. Edward shifted uncomfortably. Mother, I don't think our server needs to hear family history. Our server, Margaret signed with emphasis, has a name, Amara, and she's the first person in this entire restaurant to look me in the eye instead of through me. The man with the newspaper had moved tables, Amara noticed. He was closer now, just 2 tables away. He'd ordered only coffee, and his cup sat untouched while he pretended to read. Something about him set off every instinct she developed growing up in rough neighborhoods. This wasn't casual interest. Mrs. Hale, Amara signed carefully. I think someone is watching your table. Margaret's eyes didn't move, but her hands responded. Gray suit? Been following us for 3 days. Edward knows. Edward's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, frowning. Victor's here. He's joining us for the main course. He looked at Amara with those calculating eyes. I hope you can keep up with a larger party. Of course, sir. As if on cue, a man strode through the restaurant with the confidence of someone who owned whatever room he entered. Victor Hale was younger than Edward, perhaps 30, with sandy hair and a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. He bent to kiss Margaret's cheek, and Amara saw her subtle recoil. Aunt Margaret, lovely as always, Victor said loudly, as if volume would penetrate her deafness. And Edward, cousin, thanks for the invitation. He finally noticed Amara, his eyes conducting a swift assessment. Well, hello. I don't think we've met. This is Amara, Edward said flatly. She'll be serving us tonight. Amara signs, Margaret added in her soft voice, watching Victor's reaction. Victor's eyebrows rose. Does she now? How fortunate. His smile widened, but his eyes remained cold. Tell me, Amara, where does one learn such a skill? Before she could answer, Chloe appeared with a water pitcher, moving too quickly. Her elbow caught Amara's arm, sending the pitcher tumbling. Water splashed across the pristine tablecloth, barely missing Margaret's designer dress. Oh my God, I'm so sorry, Chloe gasped, though her eyes glittered with satisfaction. Amara, you should be more careful. The entire restaurant seemed to pause, watching. Amara felt her face burn as Chloe made a show of dabbing at the water with a napkin, managing to make the situation worse. That's enough. Margaret's voice cut through the performance. She turned to Gerald, who had materialized again. This young woman, she gestured at Chloe, is no longer welcome near our table. Amara will handle everything. Chloe's face went white, then red. I was just trying to help. You were trying to embarrass a colleague, Margaret said clearly. I may be deaf, but I'm not blind. As Chloe retreated, humiliated, Victor chuckled. Aunt Margaret, you haven't changed. Still defending the underdog. Someone has to, Margaret signed, and Amara translated without being asked. Too many people in this family enjoy stepping on others. Edward's fork clinked against his plate. Shall we order our main courses? Or would you prefer to continue the sociology lesson? Why not both? Margaret signed with a slight smile. Amara, what do you recommend for someone who appreciates subtle flavors? As Amara began describing the evening's specials, she noticed the man in the gray suit had put down his newspaper entirely. He was typing something on his phone, his eyes moving between the screen and their table. When he caught her looking, he didn't pretend otherwise. Instead, he gave her a small, unsettling smile. Margaret noticed her distraction. That man troubles you. Yes, Amara signed back. Something about him feels wrong. Trust your instincts, Margaret signed. They're usually right. My late husband taught me that threats often come dressed in expensive suits. Victor had been watching the signed exchange with interest. It's fascinating watching you two communicate. Like a secret language. All language is secret to those who don't bother learning it, Margaret responded, and Amara translated, noting Edward's sharp look at his cousin. Speaking of secrets, Victor continued smoothly. Edward, We need to discuss the Singapore situation. The board is getting restless. Not now, Edward said curtly. When then? You've been avoiding the topic for weeks. Victor's friendly mask slipped slightly. Some of us think you're being too cautious. Some of us aren't, CEO, Edward responded coldly. The tension at the table ratcheted up another notch. Margaret signed something to Amara that she didn't translate, but Edward caught it anyway. His mother had called him stubborn, just like his father. What did she say? Victor asked, looking between them. Nothing important, Edward said, but his knuckles were white around his wine glass. Everything she says is important, Amara found herself saying, then immediately regretted speaking out of turn. The table went silent. Victor looked amused, Edward furious, and Margaret. Margaret looked proud. Well said, Victor murmured. You know, Amara, someone with your skills could make much more than a server salary. The corporate world always needs good communicators. She's fine where she is, Edward said sharply. Don't poach my mother's new favorite person. Your mother's new friend, Margaret corrected aloud, then signed to Amara. Don't let them make you feel small. You stand taller than both of them. The apartment was quiet when Amara finally got home that night, well past midnight. She kicked off her serving shoes by the door, her feet aching from the extended shift. The living room light was still on. Marcus always waited up when she worked late, though he pretended he was just studying. Her younger brother looked up from his engineering textbook, his eyes immediately scanning her face. At 22, Marcus had their mother's keen ability to read people, something that had kept them both safe through difficult years. Long night? He asked, setting aside his highlighter. Strange night, Amara corrected, collapsing onto their worn but comfortable couch. The apartment wasn't much, 2 bedrooms, creaky floors, windows that didn't quite seal properly, but it was theirs. No landlord could evict them anymore, not since she'd finally saved enough to buy it outright last year. Strange how? Marcus leaned forward, concerned. Did someone give you trouble? Because I told you I can come down there. No, nothing like that. Amara pulled her hair free from its tight bun, massaging her scalp. You know Edward Hale? The tech billionaire? Marcus whistled low. Everyone knows him. Dude's either a genius or a villain, depending on which article you read. What? He came in tonight. With his mother. Amara paused, remembering Margaret's warm smile. She's deaf. And you signed with her, Marcus said. Not a question, but a statement. He knew his sister well enough to predict her actions. I couldn't just ignore her. Everyone else was acting like she was invisible, or worse, like she was broken. Even her own son. Amara trailed off, then looked at her brother seriously. Marcus, there was something else. A man was watching them. Following them, the mother said. He gave me this feeling, you know, like when we lived in the old neighborhood, and you could tell someone was about to start trouble. Marcus's expression darkened. He remembered those days, too, before Amara had gotten the job at La Couronne, when they lived paycheck to paycheck in a building where gunshots were background noise. Maybe you should stay away from them. Rich people's problems aren't our problems. The mother, Margaret, she was different. She reminded me of Grandma. Amara's voice softened. The way she held herself, proud despite everything. And when I signed with her, it was like watching someone who'd been drowning finally get air. Amara. Marcus's voice carried a warning. These aren't our people. You serve them food, they pay you, in a transaction. Getting involved with their family drama. I know, but even as she said it, Amara remembered Margaret's gentle touch on her hand, the first genuine human connection she'd felt at work in 2 years. I know, she repeated, less convincingly. Marcus studied his sister's face, then sighed. Just be careful, and remember what Grandma always said. Your gift will protect you, Amara quoted softly. Their grandmother had said it so often, always when teaching Amara new signs, always with that mysterious smile. Amara had thought she meant the sign language itself was protection, a skill that could get her jobs, help her communicate. But lately, she wondered if Grandma had meant something more. The next morning came too quickly. Amara arrived at La Couronne an hour before her shift, wanting to review the previous night's events with a clear head. The restaurant was different in daylight, less magical, more obviously a business. Sunlight streaming through the tall windows revealed tiny imperfections the candlelight hid. A small stain on the carpet, a chip in the marble, dust motes floating through the air. She wasn't surprised to find Gerald waiting for her in the staff room, but she was surprised to see the general manager, Mr. Whitman, beside him. The older man rarely involved himself with the floor staff directly. "Miss Thompson," Mr. Whitman began, his tone neutral. "We received some interesting feedback about last night." Amara's stomach dropped. Had Edward complained? Had she overstepped? "Mrs. Hale called this morning," he continued. "She specifically requested that you be assigned to their table whenever they dine here." She was quite insistent. Relief flooded through her, followed quickly by confusion. "They're coming back tonight, and apparently, they've made reservations for the next 2 weeks as well. Daily." Mr. Whitman's expression was unreadable. "This is highly unusual. The Hales typically rotate between several establishments." "However," Gerald interjected, his face pinched with disapproval, "we've also received a complaint. Miss Brennan says you deliberately undermined her last night, that you've been manipulating guests for better tips." "That's not." Amara started, but Whitman held up a hand. "I'm not particularly interested in staff squabbles. What I am interested in is keeping the Hale family happy. They're worth more to this establishment than, well, considerably more. You'll continue serving them. Miss Brennan will be assigned to other sections." After they left, Amara stood alone in the staff room, processing this turn of events. Through the door's small window, she could see Chloe at the service station, her body language radiating fury as she spoke rapidly to another server. When Chloe's eyes met hers through the glass, the look she gave Amara was pure venom. That evening, true to their word, the Hales returned. This time, Edward brought a tablet and a stack of documents, clearly intending to work through dinner. Margaret seemed subdued, her usual elegance dampened by something Amara couldn't quite identify. Exhaustion? Worry? "Good evening, Mrs. Hale," Amara signed as she approached. "It's wonderful to see you again." Margaret's smile was tired but genuine. "Hello, dear. I'm afraid we're not very entertaining company tonight. Edward has a crisis, as usual." "It's not a crisis," Edward said without looking up from his tablet. "It's a strategic concern." "Everything is a crisis or a strategic concern with you," Margaret signed, and Amara chose not to translate that particular comment. As she poured their water, Amara noticed something different about the dining room. The man in the gray suit wasn't there, but there was someone new, a woman this time, elegantly dressed, sitting alone with a book she never seemed to actually read. Her eyes kept drifting to the Hale table. "Your usuals to start?" Amara asked, having memorized their preferences from the previous night. "Actually," Edward said, finally looking up, "I need you to do something." He pulled out a phone and showed her a screen full of text. "Can you sign this to my mother?" "Exactly as written." Amara looked at the message. It was about a business deal, full of technical jargon and numbers. But embedded in it was something else, a test. Random words that didn't belong, placed to see if she would sign them exactly, or try to make sense of them. "I can sign it," Amara said carefully, "but some of these terms don't have direct sign equivalents. I need to fingerspell them, or use conceptual signs." Edward's eyes narrowed slightly. "You understand the business terms? My brother is studying engineering. He talks about market valuations and venture capital constantly. You pick things up." She began signing to Margaret, who watched with growing amusement. Halfway through, Margaret held up her hand. "Tell my son I'm not an idiot. I can see he's testing you, and it's insulting to both of us." "She says," Amara began. "I know what she said," Edward interrupted, a flush creeping up his neck. "I can read basic signs. Then why don't you use them?" The question slipped out before Amara could stop it. The silence that followed was deafening. Margaret's eyes widened slightly, a small smile playing at her lips. Edward's expression was unreadable, his gray eyes fixed on Amara with an intensity that made her want to step back. "Because," he said finally, his voice low and controlled, "my father believed that accommodating weakness made you weak yourself." Margaret's hands moved sharply. "Your father was a fool who mistook cruelty for strength." This time, Amara did translate, watching Edward's jaw tighten. The moment stretched taut, and she wondered if she'd finally crossed the line that would get her fired. Then Edward laughed, a short, bitter sound. You might be the first server brave enough to translate her insults accurately. The last one kept softening them. Your mother says what she means, Amara replied. It would be disrespectful to change her words. Disrespectful, Edward repeated, as if tasting the word. Yes, I suppose it would be. The woman with the book had moved tables, Amara noticed. Closer, just like the man from last night. This was definitely not coincidence. 3 nights later, Amara found herself in a situation she'd never imagined, serving at a private dinner in La Couronne's exclusive upper dining room. Edward had booked the entire space for a meeting with what he called essential partners. The room was intimidating in its opulence. Gold-leafed ceiling, original oil paintings, a chandelier that had supposedly belonged to a European royal family. The men gathered around the table were the kind who appeared in Fortune magazine and influenced global markets with their decisions. They spoke in millions like others spoke in dollars, their casual conversation affecting thousands of jobs and entire industries. Amara recognized at least 2 from newspaper photos. Harrison Walsh, who owned a media empire, and David Sterling, whose investment firm controlled significant portions of several major corporations. Margaret sat at Edward's right hand, dressed in an elegant navy dress that made her silver hair shine. To anyone else, she might have appeared to be mere decoration, the silent mother brought along for appearance's sake. But Amara saw the sharp intelligence in her eyes, the way she tracked every speaker, reading lips and body language with practiced skill. Gentlemen, Edward began, his voice carrying that particular authority that came from never having been truly powerless. Thank you for joining us tonight. I believe you all know my mother, Margaret. The men nodded politely in Margaret's direction, the kind of acknowledgement given to furniture that happened to have a name. Harrison Walsh didn't even look up from his phone. And this is Amara, Edward continued, surprising her. She'll be facilitating tonight. Facilitating? Sterling asked, his thick brows drawing together. My mother will be participating in our discussion. Amara translates. The shift in the room was palpable. Walsh finally looked up from his phone, his expression skeptical. No offense, Edward, but this is a sensitive business discussion. Your mother is lovely, I'm sure, but... My mother, Edward interrupted coolly, sits on 3 boards and has a better understanding of market dynamics than half the people at this table. An uncomfortable silence followed. Amara positioned herself where Margaret could see her clearly, trying to become invisible while remaining useful. She'd worn her best outfit, a simple black dress she'd bought secondhand, but which looked expensive enough to not embarrass the Hales in this company. Let's discuss the Singapore expansion, Sterling said, clearly wanting to move past the awkwardness. The government there is getting cold feet about foreign investment. As the men began discussing complex international finance, Amara signed everything to Margaret, her hands flying to keep up with the rapid conversation. She'd spent the previous 2 nights studying financial terminology in ASL, watching YouTube videos until her eyes burned, determined not to embarrass herself or Margaret. 20 minutes into the discussion, Walsh made a comment about the optics of having too much family involvement in the company's public face. No offense to your mother, Edward, but in Asian markets, they prefer to see strong, vocal leadership. Having silent partners, especially family members who can't participate in presentations. Margaret's hands moved swiftly, and before Edward could stop her, Amara was translating. Mr. Walsh, I've been silent during this entire discussion, yet I've counted 3 factual errors in your analysis of the Singapore market for assumptions based on outdated data and a fundamental misunderstanding of their current political climate. Would you like me to elaborate? Or shall we continue pretending that the ability to speak equals the ability to think? The room went absolutely still. Walsh's face turned an interesting shade of red. Sterling set down his wine glass with exaggerated care. The 4th man at the table, whom Amara hadn't been introduced to, leaned forward with obvious interest. By all means, Edward said, his voice carrying a dangerous edge of amusement. Elaborate. Margaret's signs were crisp and precise. Amara translated, her voice steady despite her nerves. Singapore's hesitation isn't about foreign investment generally. It's about American tech companies specifically, following the data breach at Technova last month. The minister you're trying to reach, Mr. Walsh? His daughter was one of the victims. You're approaching this as a financial issue when it's personal. The market their values face and trust over profit margins. Every meeting you've bombed because you led with numbers instead of relationship building. Walsh opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again. How could you possibly know about the minister's daughter? Margaret smiled slightly and signed. Because unlike you, I pay attention to the wives at social functions. They know everything their husbands pretend is secret. Mrs. Chun told me about her friend's daughter 3 weeks ago at the charity gala you spent hitting on the cocktail waitress. Amara translated it exactly, though her hands trembled slightly. She expected explosion, firing, possibly being escorted out by security. Instead, the unnamed fourth man began to laugh. She's right, Harrison. I told you that approach wouldn't work. Sterling was studying Margaret with new interest. What else have we missed? For the next hour, Margaret dissected their business strategies with surgical precision, using information gleaned from sources these powerful men had never considered valuable. The wives they ignored, the servants they overlooked, the disabled they dismissed. Amara translated it all, watching the men's expressions shift from skepticism to surprise to something approaching respect. Edward said little, but Amara noticed the way he watched his mother, something softening in his expression. When Margaret signed about a particular leverage point in negotiations, he actually smiled. A real smile, not his usual cold smirk. Your mother is remarkable, Sterling finally said to Edward. I apologize for my earlier assumptions. Most people underestimate her, Edward replied. It's actually quite useful. As the dinner wound down and the men began to leave, Walsh lingered. He approached Margaret directly, though he spoke to Amara. Tell her I was wrong, and ask if she'd be willing to consult on the Singapore situation. Paid, of course. Margaret's response was gracious but firm. I'll consider it, if you learn to sign please and thank you first. Basic courtesy shouldn't require a translator. After Walsh left, looking chastened, Edward turned to his mother. You didn't have to defend me earlier. Margaret signed. I wasn't defending you. I was defending the company. You just happened to benefit. But her eyes were soft, and Amara saw Edward's hand briefly cover his mother's on the table. The first genuinely affectionate gesture she'd witnessed between them. Amara, Edward said, his voice different, less sharp, thank you. You handled that perfectly. Before she could respond, Margaret signed something quickly. There's someone watching from the kitchen door. He's been there for 10 minutes. Amara glanced over casually. It was the man in the gray suit, dressed now in server's attire, but his bearing was all wrong. No server stood that straight, that still. I see him, Edward said quietly. Amara, I need you to do exactly as I say. Take my mother to the women's lounge. Stay there for 5 minutes, then leave through the service elevator. My driver will be waiting. Edward. Margaret began to protest aloud. Please, mother. Just this once, don't argue. The urgency in his voice was unmistakable. Amara helped Margaret to her feet, signing, It's okay. We'll be safe. As they walked toward the lounge, Amara heard Edward on his phone, his voice low and angry. Victor, we need to talk. Now. In the elegant women's lounge, Margaret sank into one of the velvet chairs. Her hand shook slightly as she signed. That man isn't a photographer or a journalist. Then what is he? Amara signed back. Someone who wants to hurt my son, or use me to hurt him. Margaret's eyes were sad. It wouldn't be the first time. Your husband? Amara asked carefully. Margaret's smile was bitter. My husband believed in control above all else. He controlled Edward through criticism, me through isolation. When he died, I thought we were finally free. But some chains are harder to break than others. The 5 minutes felt like hours. When they finally made their way to the service elevator, Amara's heart was pounding. Every shadow could hide a threat. Every footstep could be pursuit. But they made it to the car without incident, the driver immediately pulling away from the curb. Miss Thompson, the driver said, looking in the rearview mirror, Mr. Hale asked me to take you home after I drop off Mrs. Hale. He said to tell you not to come to work tomorrow. Am I fired? Amara asked, her stomach dropping. Margaret grabbed her hand, signing emphatically with the other. No. He's protecting you. Someone has been asking questions about you. About your brother. Ice filled Amara's veins. Marcus? What about Marcus? I don't know details, but Edward will handle it. He's good at protecting what he considers his. I'm not his, Amara said reflexively. Margaret's smile was knowing. No, but you're mine now. And despite his faults, my son protects what's mine. As the car pulled up to Margaret's building, a gleaming tower that spoke of old money and new technology, the older woman squeezed Amara's hand. Her signs were gentle but urgent. Be careful. The man watching us, he's connected to something bigger. Something about the company, about power. Edward won't tell me everything, but I know it's dangerous. Why are you trusting me with this? Amara signed back. Because you see me as a person, not a problem or a profit. That's rarer than you might think in our world. Margaret paused, then added, and because I think you might be exactly what my son needs, even if neither of you knows it yet. Before Amara could respond to that shocking statement, Margaret was gone, disappearing into the building's marble lobby. The driver pulled away, heading toward Amara's neighborhood, and she was left with her thoughts spinning. Her phone buzzed. An unknown number had sent a message. You're in over your head, waitress. Walk away while you can. A second message followed immediately, this time from Edward's number. Ignore any threats. You're under my protection now. We'll discuss terms tomorrow. Terms? Protection? Amara looked out at the city lights blurring past, wondering how serving water and translating sign language had suddenly placed her in the middle of what felt like a corporate thriller. Her grandmother's words echoed in her mind. Your gift will protect you. But as the car turned onto her street and she saw Marcus's worried face in their apartment window, Amara wondered if her gift had actually put everyone she loved in danger. The coffee shop Edward had chosen for their meeting was nothing like La Couronne. It was small, unremarkable, the kind of place where contractors grabbed quick breakfasts and college students nursed single cups for hours while using the Wi-Fi. Amara arrived 15 minutes early, her nerves making her stomach churn. She'd barely slept after last night's threatening message. Edward was already there, tucked into a corner booth where he could see both entrances. Without his usual expensive suit, dressed instead in dark jeans and a simple black sweater, he looked younger, less intimidating. Almost human. Sit, he said as she approached. We need to discuss several things. Amara slid into the booth, noting how he'd positioned her with her back to the wall. No one could approach without her seeing them. Am I in danger? Yes, Edward said simply, but not for the reasons you think. He pulled out a tablet, swiping to a photograph. Do you recognize this woman? The image showed Chloe outside the restaurant, handing an envelope to the man in the gray suit. The timestamp was from 3 days ago, during Amara's shift. Chloe, Amara breathed. She's been selling information about my mother's schedule, her routines, who she interacts with. Edward's jaw was tight. The man she's meeting is named Thomas Garrett. He works for people who would very much like to see my company fail. Corporate espionage. Amara had heard the term, but never imagined it would touch her life. Among other things, Edward studied her face. Your colleague has been documenting your interactions with my mother, recording what she can of your signed conversations. Try to interpret them herself. Amara felt sick. Every friendly gesture from Margaret, every moment of connection, had been watched, cataloged, potentially weaponized. But why would anyone care about your mother? She's not. She stopped, remembering last night's dinner, Margaret's sharp insights. She's not what? Involved in the business. Edward's smile was grim. My mother knows more about our operations than most of my executives. She attends board meetings, even if most members ignore her. She has access to everything. He paused. And now, through you, she has a voice they didn't expect. I didn't mean to. I know. Edward's voice softened fractionally. You were just being kind. It's a quality so rare in my world that it actually stands out as suspicious. He pulled up another image. This is why I really asked you here. The photograph showed Margaret at some kind of medical facility, machines surrounding her, her face drawn with exhaustion. Amara's heart clenched. 3 months ago, my mother collapsed during a board meeting. Minor stroke. The doctor said stress was a factor. Edward's hands clenched on the table. She's been hiding how much effort it takes to navigate a world that refuses to accommodate her. The constant strain of lip reading, of being excluded, of fighting to be heard. But last night at the dinner was the most animated I've seen her in years. Because of you. Edward met her eyes directly. I need you to understand something. I don't trust easily. I don't like easily. But my mother trusts you, and her judgment has always been better than mine. Before Amara could respond, his phone buzzed. Edward's face went pale as he read the message. We need to go. Now. What's wrong? My mother collapsed at home. The ambulance is en route. He was already standing, throwing cash on the table. You're coming with me. I don't. Please. The words seemed to cost him. She'll want you there. The ride to the hospital was a blur. Edward drove with controlled aggression, weaving through traffic while making rapid phone calls. Amara, caught fragments, security breach, Victor's location, lockdown protocols. At the hospital, they found Margaret in a private room, looking small and fragile against the white sheets. Her eyes opened when they entered, immediately seeking Amara. I'm okay, she signed weakly. Just tired. You're not okay, Edward said, forgetting she couldn't hear him until Amara translated. The doctor said it was exhaustion, Margaret signed, and stress. Apparently, being followed by mysterious men isn't good for one's health. A knock at the door interrupted them. Victor Hale entered, his usual smile in place, but his eyes calculating. Aunt Margaret, Edward. I came as soon as I heard. How did you hear? Edward asked coldly. I haven't notified the family yet. I have my sources. Victor's gaze landed on Amara. And you brought the waitress. How thoughtful. Margaret's hands moved sharply. Her name is Amara, and she's my friend. Of course, Victor said smoothly, though Amara noticed he'd understood the signs without translation. I just think it's interesting how quickly she's become indispensable. Almost like it was planned. What are you implying? Edward stepped forward, his body language threatening. Nothing at all. Just observing. Victor pulled out his phone. By the way, Edward, the board is concerned. Your mother's health, these security issues, the Singapore deal falling apart. Some are questioning your leadership. Let them question, Edward replied. Oh, they're doing more than questioning. There's talk of a vote. Victor's smile widened. Just thought you should know. After he left, Margaret signed urgently to Amara. Victor learned sign language as a child, but he pretends he doesn't know it. He's been able to understand everything we've discussed. Edward cursed, low and vicious. That explains how our competitors knew about the Walsh meeting details. He looked at Amara. From now on, we need a different system. Can you teach my mother home signs? Personal variations only you two would know. That would take time. We have time. My mother is staying in my apartment for security reasons. You'll move in temporarily as her companion and translator. I can't just move in with you. Amara protested. I have a job, a brother. Your brother can visit. As for your job, I've already arranged a leave of absence with full pay. At her shocked expression, he added, I own 40% of La Couronne. It wasn't difficult. Margaret reached for Amara's hand, her signs urgent. Please, I'm scared, and I trust you. We need you. That we hung in the air. Edward wasn't looking at her, his jaw tight, but Amara saw the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands clenched and unclenched. He was scared too, just better at hiding it. 1 week, Amara said finally. I'll give you 1 week. Edward nodded, already on his phone, making arrangements. Margaret squeezed her hand, signing, thank you. 2 hours later, Marcus arrived at the hospital, having been summoned by Edward's driver. His face was a study in disbelief as Edward explained the situation. You want my sister to live with you, Marcus said flatly. Because of corporate espionage and your mother needs a translator. I want your sister protected while she helps protect my mother, Edward corrected. She'll have her own suite, a security detail, and a salary that should cover your next 2 years of college. Marcus looked at Amara. This is insane. I know, she admitted. But Mrs. Hale needs help and... She glanced at Margaret, who was pretending to sleep but clearly listening. I want to help. Fine. But I'm checking in daily. And if anything happens to her, nothing will, Edward said with such conviction that Amara almost believed him. Edward's penthouse occupied the top 2 floors of a building that scraped the sky. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of the city, and every surface spoke of money spent without consideration. Yet for all its luxury, the space felt cold, unlived in. The only warm spot was the corner Margaret had claimed, where she'd arranged fresh flowers and family photos Amara hadn't expected to see. "This was my grandmother's," Margaret signed, showing Amara a photo of a young woman who looked remarkably like Margaret herself. She was deaf too. It skipped a generation, then came to me gradually. They were developing their private sign variations, adding personal markers to common signs that would be meaningless to anyone watching. Margaret was a quick study, her hands graceful as she created their secret language within a language. Edward watched from his home office, supposedly working, but his attention constantly drawn to the 2 women. Amara had changed into comfortable clothes, jeans and a soft sweater Margaret had insisted on buying for her, and looked younger, less guarded. When she laughed at something his mother signed, the sound did something uncomfortable to his chest. His phone rang. The caller ID showed his head of security. "Mr. Hale, we've traced the shell company paying Garrett. It routes through 3 offshore accounts, but the originating source is Venture Aegis." Edward's blood ran cold. Venture Aegis was their risk assessment firm, retained specifically by "Send me everything. Encrypted channels only." He stood, pacing to the window. If Venture Aegis was involved, that meant the threat came from inside their own corporate structure. Only 3 people had authority to retain that firm: himself, the CFO, and Victor in his role as Chief Strategy Officer. Edward. His mother's voice broke his concentration. She so rarely spoke aloud that it always startled him. He turned to find both women watching him with concern. Amara signed his mother's question. "What's wrong?" "I need to show you both something," he said, making a decision that would have shocked him a week ago. Trusting anyone outside himself with sensitive information went against every instinct his father had beaten into him. He pulled up the financial records on his secure laptop, angling it so they could see. "Someone inside our company is paying to have us watched, to gather intelligence on our operations. The money trail leads back to our own risk assessment firm." Margaret studied the screen, her eyes sharp. She signed to Amara. Using their new variations, check the dates. "When did the payment start?" Amara translated, and Edward pulled up the timeline. 6 months ago. Right after you refused the merger with Cascade Industries." Margaret signed through Amara. "Victor pushed hard for that deal. He said it would triple our market value." Edward murmured, pieces clicking together. "It would have also given Cascade controlling interest in our clean energy patents." Margaret signed rapidly. "The ones your father spent 20 years developing." Edward's phone buzzed. Another message from his security chief. "Sir, Victor Hale just accessed the executive floor using his override codes. He's heading to the archived servers. He's going for the patent documentation," Edward said, already moving. "Stay here. Lock the door behind me." But Margaret was standing too, her movements decisive. "We're coming with you." "Mother, no." Her signs were sharp, translated quickly by Amara. "Those patents were your father's only good legacy. I won't let Victor steal them." The 3 of them took Edward's private elevator to the executive floor. The offices were dark, empty at this hour except for security lighting. Edward moved quietly, Margaret and Amara behind him, toward the server room. They found Victor inside, a portable drive connected to the main server, files copying rapidly onto it. He looked up when they entered, no surprise on his face. "Hello, cousin," he said mildly. "Aunt Margaret," and then valuable Amara. "Step away from the server," Edward said, his voice deadly calm. "I don't think so." Victor pulled out his phone, showing a live video feed. "Recognize this location?" It was Marcus's apartment building. A man stood outside his door, Garrett, the gray-suited stalker. "One call from me, and your translator's brother has a very bad night," Victor said conversationally. "So let's discuss this like civilized people." Amara started forward, but Margaret caught her arm. The older woman's signs were subtle, meant only for her. Record this. My phone left pocket. While Edward kept Victor talking, Amara carefully extracted Margaret's phone, starting a recording. You've been selling information to Cascade, Edward stated. Selling is such a crude word. I prefer strategically redistributing. Victor's smile was cold. Do you know what your problem is, Edward? You think small. You have patents that could revolutionize energy production, and you sit on them, wanting to develop them properly, while you want to sell them to the highest bidder. I want to use them. Cascade has the infrastructure, the government connections. Together, we could control the entire energy sector. Margaret stepped forward, signing rapidly. Amara translated, her voice steady despite her fear for Marcus. You're talking about a monopoly. About controlling people's access to power, literally. Your mother always was too idealistic, Victor said to Edward. It's why your father kept her silent. He understood that power isn't about helping people. It's about controlling them. My father was a monster, Edward said quietly. I won't become him. No, you'll just let his work rot in servers while the world burns. Victor checked his phone. Downloads almost complete. Here's what happens now. I take this data to Cascade. They get what they want. In exchange, they back off their hostile takeover attempt. Everyone wins. Except the people who need clean energy, Amara said, forgetting her place. Victor laughed. The waitress has opinions. How refreshing. She's right, Edward said. And you're not leaving with that data. Then her brother. Is fine, a new voice said from the doorway. Marcus walked in, followed by two security guards, and, surprisingly, Thomas Garrett in handcuffs. Your man wasn't very good. Walked right into the police sting Edward set up. Victor's face went pale. Ow! I've known about your betrayal for 3 days, Edward said. I just needed proof. Mother's idea to let you reveal yourself. Margaret smiled, signing to Amara with their public signs now. Sometimes silence lets you hear what others are really saying. Security moved in to restrain Victor, who was sputtering threats about lawyers and board members. As they led him away, he turned back. This isn't over, Edward. The board will hear about this. Your mother's health, these security breaches, they'll vote you out. Let them try, Edward replied. After Victor was gone, Edward turned to Marcus. Thank you for trusting me. I didn't, Marcus said bluntly. But Amara did, and she's usually right about people. Margaret moved to the server, pulling out the portable drive Victor had been using. She signed to Amara, 20 years of work. My husband's only valuable contribution to the world. What will you do with them? Amara asked. Margaret looked at her son. What your father never could. Share them. Edward nodded slowly. The foundation my mother runs. We'll license the patents at cost to developing nations, affordable rates to everyone else. It's time these did some good. The board will fight you, Amara pointed out. Then we fight back, Edward said, looking at his mother. Together. Margaret reached for Amara's hand, then surprised everyone by reaching for Edward's too. For a moment, the three of them stood connected, unlikely allies in a battle none of them had expected. We should go, Marcus said, looking uncomfortable with the family moment. It's late. You should both stay tonight, Edward said. The penthouse has plenty of room, and until we know all of Victor's connections, it's safer. You just want to keep Amara close, Marcus said, his tone knowing. Edward's expression didn't change, but Amara saw the slight color in his cheeks. I want to keep everyone safe. Margaret's signs to Amara were subtle but clear. He's not wrong, though. Back in the penthouse, as they settled into their temporary home, Amara found herself on the balcony, looking out at the city lights. Edward joined her, maintaining a careful distance. I owe you an apology, he said quietly. When you first signed to my mother, I accused you of having an agenda. You were protecting her. I was being paranoid. There's a difference. He paused. My father taught me to see threats everywhere, to trust no one. It's a lonely way to live, but safe. Is it? He gestured at the night. I was so busy watching for outside threats that my own cousin betrayed me. Meanwhile, you someone I dismissed as just a waitress. You saw my mother as a person when I'd forgotten how to do that myself. Amara turned to look at him, seeing vulnerability in those gray eyes for the first time. She loves you, even when you frustrate her. I know. I just don't always deserve it. Love isn't about deserving. Before Edward could respond, Margaret appeared in the doorway, signing, "It's cold. Come inside, both of you." As they went in together, Amara caught Margaret's small smile. The older woman signed to her privately, "He's learning. Thanks to you. I haven't done anything special." Amara signed back. Margaret's response was warm. "You've done everything. You've given us both a voice." The next morning brought chaos. News of Victor's arrest had leaked, and the business channels were in overdrive. Edward's phone rang constantly, with board members demanding explanations. Through it all, Margaret remained calm, signing strategies to Edward through Amara, her insights sharp as ever. "We need to control the narrative," she signed. "Call a press conference. Show them strength, not defense." "The press doesn't accommodate," Edward began, then stopped. "Actually, that's perfect. We'll have Amara translate. Show them that Hale Industries values accessibility and inclusion." "I'm not a prop," Amara said firmly. "No," Edward agreed. "You're our secret weapon. Victor underestimated you. The board underestimates my mother. Let's show them how wrong they are." Margaret squeezed Amara's hand. "Only if you're comfortable. This would make you very public." Amara thought of all the times she'd been invisible, dismissed, overlooked. She thought of her grandmother's words about gifts and protection. Maybe this was what she'd meant. Not hiding behind silence, but using voice in all its forms to protect what mattered. "I'll do it," she said, "but I have conditions." Edward almost smiled. "Of course you do. First, Marcus gets a full scholarship for his remaining education. Second, you fund an ASL program at La Couronne and every restaurant you have an interest in. Third, you hire deaf and hard-of-hearing employees across your company, with proper accommodations." "Done," Edward said without hesitation. "Anything else?" Amara looked at Margaret, who was beaming. "Yes, you learn to sign properly. No more excuses." This time Edward did smile, small but genuine. "Mother's been trying to teach me for years." "Then it's time you became a better student," Amara said. Margaret signed something that made Edward flush slightly. When Amara looked curious, Margaret signed to her. "I said he never had the right motivation before." The weight of that statement, the implication behind it, made Amara's heart skip. She caught Edward watching her, something warm in those previously cold eyes. "The press conference is tomorrow," he said, clearing his throat. "We should prepare." As they began planning, Amara realized her simple life of serving tables and staying invisible was truly over. But looking at Margaret's animated face, feeling Edward's presence beside her, she couldn't bring herself to regret it. Her grandmother had been right. Her gift had protected her. But more than that, it had brought her to exactly where she needed to be. The Aurora Foundation Gala was the kind of event that made headlines simply by happening. Held at the Peninsula Hotel's Grand Ballroom, it brought together the city's elite under the pretense of charity while they conducted the real business of power. Amara stood before the full-length mirror in Margaret's penthouse suite, barely recognizing herself in the elegant midnight blue gown Margaret had insisted on buying. "You look beautiful," Margaret signed, appearing behind her in a stunning silver dress that complemented her hair perfectly. "I look like I'm playing dress-up," Amara signed back with her private variations, nervous fingers smoothing fabric that cost more than she used to make in 3 months. "You look like you belong," Margaret corrected. "Because you do." Edward appeared in the doorway, immaculate in his tuxedo, and for a moment his expression was unguarded as he looked at Amara. "The car's ready," he said, his voice slightly rough. He cleared his throat. Security swept the venue twice. "We've identified all of Victor's known associates who'll be attending." "It's a trap," Margaret signed to both of them. "Victor may be in custody, but whoever's really behind this won't give up easily." "That's what we're counting on," Edward replied, his signs still clumsy but improving. "Let them show themselves." The ride to the hotel was tense. Edward briefed them one final time. "Mother, you'll be at the main table with me. Amara, you'll stand behind her, translating. Security has eyes on every entrance. If anything seems wrong, we signal Amara finished." They developed a subtle hand movement, disguised as adjusting Margaret's shawl that would bring security immediately. Remember, Margaret signed, "Tonight we're not just fighting for the company. We're showing them that different doesn't mean less than." The ballroom was a sea of glittering gowns and sharp tuxedos, champagne flowing like water, conversations conducted in millions. Heads turned as they entered, not just for Edward, but for Margaret, making her first public appearance in years, and for Amara, an unknown standing where a family member or business associate should be. Edward. Harrison Walsh approached, his smile not reaching his eyes. And Margaret, lovely as always. "I heard about Victor. Shocking business." "Yes," Edward said coolly. "Betrayal always is." Walsh's gaze slid to Amara, dismissive. "And you brought your translator." "Ms. Thompson," Edward corrected, with just enough ice to make Walsh step back slightly. "She's instrumental to tonight's proceedings." They made their way to the main table, strategically positioned on a raised platform where everyone could see them. Amara noticed it immediately, a small device tucked under the podium's ledge, barely visible. She caught Margaret's eye, signing subtly about its location. Margaret, smooth as silk, placed her metallic clutch directly over the device while pretending to adjust her position. The microtransmitter would be useless now, its signal blocked. "Ladies and gentlemen," the Foundation's president began from the podium, "tonight we celebrate innovation and inclusion in business." As the speeches droned on, Amara scanned the room. She spotted at least 3 people who'd been photographed with Victor in the surveillance files Edward had shown her. One kept checking his phone, looking increasingly agitated. Then she saw him, not the man in gray, but someone else. An older man, silver-haired and distinguished, watching from a corner table with an intensity that made her skin crawl. When he caught her looking, he raised his champagne glass in a mock toast. "Margaret," she signed carefully, using their private language. "Corner table, silver hair." "He's wrong." Margaret glanced casually in that direction and went rigid. Her hands trembled as she signed back. "Richard, Edward's father. He's supposed to be dead." Before Amara could process this shocking information, Edward was standing, moving to the podium for his speech. He noticed nothing, focused on addressing the crowd about Hale Industries' new direction. "We stand at a crossroads," Edward began, his voice carrying across the ballroom. "We can continue the old ways, hoarding innovation, prioritizing profit over progress. Or we can choose differently." Behind him, Amara saw movement. Chloe, dressed as catering staff, was approaching with a tray of champagne. But her trajectory was wrong, aimed at Margaret rather than serving guests. Time seemed to slow. Chloe tripped, champagne flying toward Margaret. Amara moved without thinking, shielding the older woman, taking the spill across her expensive dress. In the chaos, she saw Chloe's hand dart out, grabbing Margaret's clutch. "No!" Amara lunged, catching Chloe's wrist, but the other woman had already passed the clutch to someone, the photographer from the restaurant, dressed now as a server. "Security issue," Amara called out, forgetting subtlety. But Edward was already moving, having spotted his supposedly dead father. His face was white with shock. "Everyone remain calm," he said in a microphone, though his voice shook slightly. "Please continue enjoying your evening." Security converged from multiple directions, but Richard Hale was already walking toward the platform, calm, as if he owned the place. Which, Amara realized with growing horror, he might actually believe he did. "Hello, son," Richard said, his voice carrying despite not using the microphone. "Aren't you going to introduce me to your guests? Or have you already told them I'm dead?" The ballroom erupted in whispers. Phones came out, recording everything. This was the kind of drama that would be on every business news channel by morning. Margaret stood slowly, dignified despite the champagne staining Amara's dress beside her. She signed something, and Amara translated in a clear voice that carried, "Richard, you always did like making an entrance." "Margaret, my dear wife," Richard's smile was cold. "Still hiding behind others to speak for you, I see." "Not hiding," Margaret signed, Amara translating firmly. "Choosing who deserves to hear my voice." "Touching. But I'm not here for reunions." Richard pulled out a folder. "I'm here for what's mine." "Edward, You've done well growing my company, but it's time for the adults to take control again. You're dead, Edward said flatly. Legally dead. You have no claim. A misunderstanding, easily corrected. I've been in Switzerland, recovering from a terrible accident. Amnesia, you understand. But recent events, my nephew Victor's arrest, these wild decisions about giving away patents, shocked me back to myself. It was a lie, beautifully constructed and impossible to quickly disprove. Amara saw several board members in the crowd, looking thoughtful, calculating. Richard had planned this perfectly. You can't just, Edward began. I can and I will. Emergency board meeting tomorrow morning. We'll discuss my reinstatement and your stepping aside. Richard's gaze moved to Amara, and we'll discuss the inappropriate influence of certain outsiders on company decisions. Margaret's hands flew in sharp, angry signs. Amara translated every word. You abused your position. You abused your family. You have no right to anything we've built without you. Abuse. Richard laughed. I tried to strengthen you. Both of you. But you were too weak to appreciate it. He looked at the crowd. Is this who you want leading Hale Industries? A son who needs his deaf mother's approval? Who lets a waitress make strategic decisions? The insult hung in the air. Amara felt rage build in her chest. Not for herself, but for Margaret, standing there with quiet dignity while her abuser performed for the crowd. Then she had an idea. Mr. Hale, she said directly to Richard, not translating but speaking for herself. You said Mrs. Hale hides behind others to speak. Would you prefer to speak with her directly? She can't. You could learn sign language. Unless. Amara paused, letting the challenge hang. Unless you're afraid to meet her on equal terms. The crowd murmured. Someone called out. That seems fair. Richard's face flushed. I don't need to learn circus tricks to communicate with my own wife. No, Amara said clearly. You just need to respect her enough to try. Margaret stepped forward, signing fluidly. Amara translated. 23 years of marriage. You never learned a single sign. Not hello. Not I love you. Not even my name. This is ridiculous, Richard started. What's ridiculous, Edward interrupted, finding his voice at last, is a man who claims to be a leader but can't adapt to something as simple as a different form of communication. He moved to stand beside his mother. The board will have their meeting, and they'll see exactly what kind of man you really are. The boardroom at Hale Industries occupied the 40th floor, its glass walls offering a view of the city waking up below. Amara had barely slept, spending the night helping Edward and Margaret prepare for what felt like a war disguised as a corporate meeting. They've already chosen sides, Edward said grimly, reviewing the board member profiles. Davidson and Sterling will back us. Walsh and Peterson are definitely with Richard. The others are wild cards. Then we convinced the wild cards. Margaret signed, dressed in a severe black suit that made her look like the executive she truly was. I shouldn't be here, Amara said for the third time. I'm not a board member, not even an employee technically. You're my official interpreter, Margaret said firmly. Protected under ADA laws. They can't exclude you without excluding me. Besides, Edward added, his attempt at a reassuring smile not quite working. You're the one who challenged him publicly. He'll underestimate you. That's an advantage. They arrived to find the boardroom already half full. Richard sat at the far end of the table, in what used to be Edward's chair, talking quietly with Walsh, and two other board members Amara didn't recognize. He'd aged in his supposed death, his hair completely silver now, lines etched deep in his face, but his presence still commanded the room. Edward Davidson, an older black man with kind eyes, approached them. This is a mess. Half the board didn't even know Richard was alive. Neither did we, Edward replied tightly. As 9 o'clock approached, the remaining board members filed in. 12 people who would decide the fate of a company worth billions, and more importantly to Amara, the fate of the patents that could help millions. Let's begin, Richard said, as if he'd never left. First order of business. First order of business, Margaret interrupted, her voice soft but firm, is establishing your legal standing to be here at all. I'm the founder. You were declared legally dead 5 years ago. Sterling cut in, his lawyer's instincts engaged. Your shares were distributed according to your will. You have no current stake in this company. Richard smiled. Actually, I do. He produced a document. Before my supposed death, I transferred a significant portion of shares to a trust. A trust one still control. That's impossible, Edward said. We would have known. You would have if you'd been looking. But you were too busy playing CEO to notice the fine print. Richard's smile was predatory. Victor helped set it up. Poor boy never could stand up to family pressure. The revelation that Victor's betrayal went back years hit Edward visibly. Margaret reached for his hand under the table, a gesture of support that Richard noticed with disgust. Still coddling him, Margaret? That's why he's weak. Margaret's signs were sharp, translated by Amara. Compassion isn't weakness. Cruelty isn't strength. You never learn the difference. Enough family drama, Walsh interjected. Richard has presented a valid claim. He controls enough shares to call for new leadership. I move to reinstate him as CEO. Seconded, Peterson added quickly. Discussion first, Davidson insisted. Edward, you have the floor. Edward stood, his bearing straight despite the attack. 5 years ago, this company was stagnant. We made money, yes, but we contributed nothing. Since then, we've revolutionized 3 industries, employed thousands, and now we're on the verge of providing clean energy solutions globally. At reduced profit, Walsh countered. The patent licensing plan is financial suicide. It's financial responsibility, Edward replied. Short-term loss for long-term gain. And more importantly, it's the right thing to do. The right thing. Richard laughed. Business isn't about right or wrong. It's about power. Then let's talk about power. Margaret signed, standing as Amara translated. The power to change lives. To light homes that have never had electricity. To reduce emissions before we destroy the planet. That's real power. Pretty words from someone who can't even speak properly, Richard said dismissively. The room went cold. Several board members shifted uncomfortably. I'd like to show you all something, Amara said, pulling out her phone. Last night, after the gala, this went viral. She connected her phone to the room screen. A video played. Someone had recorded the confrontation between Richard and Margaret. But more importantly, they'd captured the crowd's reaction, the comments flooding social media. Hale Industries stands for inclusion, Amara read from the comments. Finally, a company that values different abilities. If they can't respect their own family, how can they respect customers? Public opinion doesn't run companies, Richard said, but his voice was less certain. It does when you're publicly traded, Sterling observed. Our stock is up 12% since last night. Investors love the accessibility angle. It's a fad. It's the future, a new voice said from the doorway. Everyone turned to see a woman in her 70s, impeccably dressed, leaning on an elegant cane. Amara recognized her from newspaper photos. Evelyn Shun, the oldest board member and largest individual shareholder after the Hale family. Sorry I'm late, Mrs. Chin said, making her way to her seat. I was meeting with our Tokyo partners. They're extremely interested in the accessible technology initiatives. Apparently, having a deaf executive who actually participates in meetings is revolutionary. She looked at Richard. Imagine that. Richard's jaw tightened. Evelyn, I thought you were retired. From active management, yes. But I still vote my shares. And I'm very interested in this vote. She turned to Edward. Continue, please. Edward pulled up financial projections. The clean energy patents, licensed as proposed, will generate less profit initially, but corner an emerging market. In 10 years, we'll be the industry standard. If we survive 10 years of reduced profits, Walsh argued, we will, Margaret signed, Amara translating. Because we're not just selling energy. We're selling innovation with conscience. That's a brand that transcends market fluctuations. You want to bet the company on feelings? Richard stood, his control finally slipping. This is exactly why I had to come back. You've gone soft, Edward. Letting your mother play executive. Letting this nobody translate corporate secrets. This nobody, Amara said quietly, has a name, and your son hasn't gone soft. He's gone human. The room went silent. Richard turned his cold gaze on her. You don't get to speak here. Actually, she does, Mrs. Chin said mildly. As Margaret's interpreter, she speaks with Margaret's voice. Unless you're suggesting we silence board members now. I'm suggesting, Richard said tightly, that we've strayed from what made this company great. Fear, Edward asked. Intimidation? Crushing competition through any means necessary. Power, Richard corrected. Pure and simple. Then let me show you power, Edward said. He pulled up another screen. Security footage from 5 years ago. The night before your supposed death. The grainy video showed Richard in his office with another man. Amara recognized him as the head of Cascade Industries. They were exchanging documents. You were selling us out even then, Edward said quietly. Planning to gut the company, sell off the pieces. The boat accident that supposedly killed you? You were running. The authorities were closing in on insider trading charges. Gasps around the table. Richard's face had gone pale. You can't prove. I can, actually. Victor kept meticulous records. His confession last night included everything. Edward's smile was sharp. He was more afraid of prison than of you. This is a coup. No. Margaret signed firmly, Amara translating. This is justice. I call for a vote, Davidson said. All in favor of maintaining current leadership under Edward Hale. Hands raised. Davidson, Sterling, Chun, and slowly others. Even some Amara had thought would side with Richard. All opposed. Only Walsh and Peterson raised their hands. Richard stood frozen, his empire crumbling. Motion carries, Davidson announced. Edward remained CEO. And Richard. I believe the authorities are waiting outside. The door opened. Federal agents entered, their badges gleaming. Richard Hale, you're under arrest for fraud, insider trading, and conspiracy. As they cuffed him, Richard looked at Margaret one last time. You planned this. All of it. Margaret's signs were slow, deliberate, translated by Amara. I protected my son. Something you never understood how to do. After Richard was led away, the boardroom slowly emptied until only Edward, Margaret, and Amara remained. The morning sun streamed through the windows, painting everything golden. It's over, Edward said, sounding exhausted but relieved. No, Margaret signed. It's just beginning. She was right. Over the next hours, news of Richard's arrest spread. Stock prices soared as investors responded to Edward's strong leadership and the company's new direction. The Clean Energy Initiative was approved unanimously by the remaining board. That evening, they stood on the balcony of Edward's penthouse, the city lights spreading below them. Marcus was there too, having insisted on cooking dinner to celebrate. Real food, he'd said, not that fancy stuff you're used to. I should go back to my apartment soon, Amara said quietly. You don't need a full-time interpreter anymore. No, Edward agreed. But we need you. The company needs a full-time accessibility director, Margaret signed. Someone who understands that communication comes in many forms. I don't have the qualifications. You have the only qualification that matters, Edward interrupted. You see people, not limitations. Amara looked between them. Margaret with her warm smile, Edward trying so hard to seem casual when his eyes betrayed his hope. Can I think about it? Of course, Edward said. Then, hesitantly, he signed, Take all the time you need. His signs were still clumsy, but he was trying. That mattered more than perfection. Margaret excused herself to help Marcus in the kitchen, leaving Edward and Amara alone on the balcony. Your father, Amara began, is where he belongs, Edward finished. For the first time in my life, I'm free of him. We both are. It must be hard, though. He's still your father. Edward was quiet for a moment. You know what's hard? Realizing how much time I wasted trying to earn the approval of someone incapable of giving it. How much of myself I lost trying to be what he wanted. You're not lost, Amara said softly. No, Edward agreed, turning to look at her. Not anymore. The moment stretched between them, full of possibility. Then Marcus called from inside. Food's ready, and if you let it get cold, I'm never cooking for rich people again. They laughed, the tension breaking, and went inside together. Later, as Amara helped clear dishes, Margaret caught her hand. Stay, she signed with their private language. Not for the job. For him. For us. For yourself. It's complicated. The best things always are, Margaret signed back, smiling. Through the kitchen doorway, Amara could see Edward and Marcus talking, her brother apparently explaining some engineering concept, while Edward listened intently. Two worlds that should never have overlapped, brought together by circumstance and choice. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number made her blood run cold. "You think you've won?" Richard was just the beginning. "The patents will never see the light of day." She showed it to Edward immediately. His expression hardened. "They're not giving up." "Then neither do we." Margaret signed firmly. "We?" Amara asked. "We," Edward confirmed, his hand finding hers. "If you're willing." Amara thought of her grandmother, of gifts that protect, of voices that need to be heard. She thought of Margaret's courage, Edward's growth, her own journey from invisibility to indispensability. "We," she agreed. The city hummed below them, unaware that in this penthouse, a small revolution had been won. But revolutions, Amara was learning, were never really over. They evolved, grew, spread like ripples on water. And tomorrow, they would spread these ripples further. The threatening message had changed everything. Edward tripled security, installed advanced surveillance systems, and insisted Amara and Marcus move into the penthouse indefinitely. 3 days had passed since Richard's arrest, and while the media celebrated Hale Industries' progressive victory, behind closed doors, tension mounted. The message came from inside the building. Edward's security chief, Reynolds, reported during their morning briefing. "Whoever sent it has access to our internal systems. Victor's in federal custody," Edward said, pacing by the windows. "Richard's assets are frozen. Who's left?" "Someone we haven't identified yet." Margaret signed, Amara translating. Richard was never one to show all his cards. Amara's phone buzzed. Another unknown number. The restaurant rooftop. 1 hour. "Come alone or the patents burn." She showed it to Edward, whose face darkened. "Absolutely not. It's La Couronne," Amara said, "where this all started. It's a trap. Everything's been a trap." Margaret signed pragmatically. "But we've survived them all." Edward's phone rang. He answered sharply, then went pale. "The patents servers. Someone's accessing them remotely. They're downloading everything." "Go." Margaret signed to him. "Stop them." "Amara and I will handle the rooftop." "You're not going." "I am." Margaret's signs were firm, with full security. "But whoever this is wants to talk, and I want to listen." An hour later, Amara stepped onto La Couronne's rooftop terrace, the city sprawling beneath the afternoon sun. The restaurant was closed for a private event, the rooftop supposedly empty. But 3 figures waited by the parapet. Richard, impossibly out on bail, Victor beside him looking haggard in an ankle monitor, and a third man Amara didn't recognize. "Hello, Miss Thompson," Richard said smoothly. "Thank you for coming. You're supposed to be in custody. Money buys many things, including exceptional lawyers and lenient judges." Richard gestured to the third man. "Allow me to introduce James Fitzgerald, senior partner at Fitzgerald, Klein, and Associates. He's been helping me with a particular problem." "The patents aren't yours to take," Amara said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Actually," Fitzgerald spoke for the first time, his voice cultured and cold. "There's significant legal precedent suggesting otherwise. Richard developed those patents while CEO. The intellectual property agreements are complex." "You mean you found loopholes?" "I mean," Richard said, stepping closer, "that I'm offering a deal. One last chance for everyone to walk away with something." Behind Richard, the service door opened slightly. Amara caught a glimpse of movement, security, and Edward, despite his promise to handle the servers. He'd come for her. "What deal?" she asked, buying time. "Simple." Edward steps down, quietly. "Claims health issues, stress, whatever sound believable. I return as CEO, guide the company back to profitability. The patents remain buried, but the company survives. And if we refuse..." Victor finally spoke, his voice rough. "Then Fitzgerald here files injunctions that will tie up the patents in court for decades. By the time they're resolved, the technology will be obsolete. All because you can't stand losing control," Amara said to Richard. "Control is everything," Richard replied. "Something my son never learned. He's soft, emotional, like his mother. His mother is the strongest person I know." Richard laughed bitterly. Strong? She couldn't even speak up when he stopped himself. When you hit her, Amara's voice was quiet but carried across the rooftop. When you locked her in rooms for days. When you told her that her deafness made her worthless. The door burst open fully. Margaret walked through, followed by Edward and security. But Margaret raised her hand, stopping them from advancing. "Hello, Richard," she said aloud, her voice clear despite rarely using it. Richard's composure cracked slightly. "Margaret, you should be resting. I've rested enough." She moved forward, Amara automatically positioning herself to translate. 28 years of marriage. 5 years of thinking you were dead. And you know what I felt when I heard you died? Relief. Drama doesn't become you. Margaret's signs were sharp, translated by Amara. You want to know what's dramatic? A man so terrified of weakness that he tried to destroy any sign of it in his own family. You didn't make us strong, Richard. We became strong despite you. Touching, Fitzgerald interrupted. But emotions don't change legal realities. Mr. Hale has legitimate claims. No, Edward said, stepping forward. He doesn't. He pulled out his phone, projecting a recording onto the blank wall behind them. This is from 5 minutes ago. Our security team traced the patent download. It triggered our trap protocol. The recording showed Fitzgerald's computer screen, files being downloaded. But more importantly, it showed the trail, payment from Cascade Industries, correspondence about destroying the patents rather than stealing them, and critically, forged documents about Richard's involvement in their development. You were never part of the Clean Energy Project, Edward continued. You actively suppressed it. We have the emails, the board minutes, everything. Fitzgerald had gone pale. That's illegally obtained. Actually, Reynolds, the security chief, stepped forward. It's not. You accessed our servers illegally. We traced it back through legal channels. Everything we found is admissible. You're finished, Edward said to his father. Again, Richard's face contorted with rage. He grabbed Margaret's wrist suddenly, pulling her toward the parapet. You always ruined everything. But Margaret, rather than pulling away, stepped into him, using his momentum against him. A self-defense move Amara recognized. Margaret had been taking classes, preparing for this moment. Richard stumbled, releasing her, backing toward the edge. For a heart-stopping moment, he teetered, arms windmilling. Victor lunged forward, grabbing his uncle's jacket, pulling him back to safety. Don't, Victor said quietly. He's not worth it, Aunt Margaret. Security moved in, restraining both Richard and Fitzgerald. But Richard had one more card to play. You think you've won? He snarled at Edward. I'm your father. Everything you are came from me. Edward moved to stand beside his mother and Amara. You're right. My ambition came from you. My drive, my ruthlessness, all yours. He paused. But my humanity, my ability to change, to grow, to love, that came from her. He gestured to Margaret. And my courage to be better, that came from her. He looked at Amara. This is insane, Richard spat. You're destroying everything for a waitress? No, Edward said simply. I'm building something better with a woman who showed me that power without compassion is just cruelty with a budget. As security led Richard and Fitzgerald away, Victor remained, looking broken. I'm sorry, he said to Margaret. He knew exactly what to say to make me feel worthless. Just like when we were kids. Margaret's signs were gentle, translated by Amara. I know. He did the same to Edward. To me. That's what he did. Found our weaknesses and pressed until we broke or became like him. What happens to me now? Victor asked. You testify, Edward said. Tell the truth. All of it. And then we'll see. After Victor was escorted away, the three of them stood alone on the rooftop, the weight of everything finally settling. It's really over, Amara said. This part is Margaret signed. But Edward's right. Now we build. 6 months later, the transformation of Hale Industries was complete. The building's lobby now featured digital screens with real-time sign language interpretation, ramps alongside stairs, and Braille on every sign. The executive floor had been redesigned with accessibility as a priority, not an afterthought. Amara stood in what was now her office, Director of Inclusion and Accessibility, reviewing the latest reports. 23 deaf and hard-of-hearing employees had been hired across departments. The sign language training program had a waiting list. The restaurant initiative had expanded to 30 establishments, including La Couronne. "You're smiling," Edward observed from the doorway. "The Tokyo office just sent their quarterly report," she said, turning to him. "Their accessibility initiatives increased productivity by 15%. You sound surprised." "Not surprised. Vindicated." She handed him the tablet. "Your mother was right. When you include everyone benefits." Edward moved closer, and Amara's heart did that little skip it had been doing for months now. They'd been dancing around their feelings, both too aware of the power dynamics, the complications, to act on the obvious chemistry. "Speaking of my mother," Edward said, "she wants us in the boardroom." They found Margaret there, but she wasn't alone. The board had assembled, along with someone Amara didn't recognize, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a warm smile. "Everyone," Margaret announced, speaking aloud and signing simultaneously, "I'd like you to meet Sarah Winters from the National Accessibility Foundation." Sarah stepped forward. "We're here to present Hale Industries with our Corporate Inclusion Award, but more importantly, to announce a partnership." She pulled up a presentation. "The Hale Thompson Initiative, named for both Mrs. Hale and Ms. Thompson, will provide free sign language education in underserved communities, accessibility modifications for small businesses, and scholarships for disabled students pursuing STEM fields." Amara's eyes widened. "The Hale Thompson Initiative?" Margaret smiled. "You gave me back my voice. This will help others find theirs." "The foundation is committing $50 million, Edward added, "with matching funds from our corporate partners." "This is too much," Amara protested. "No," Davidson, the board member, spoke up. "It's exactly right. Your presence here has transformed not just this company, but our entire industry. Competitors are scrambling to implement similar programs." Mrs. Chen nodded. "Our Asian partners specifically credit you with opening new markets we never could have reached otherwise." After the meeting, Amara found herself back on the rooftop of La Couronne, this time for a very different reason. The restaurant had organized a celebration for their new accessibility program launch. The terrace was full of people signing, speaking, laughing, a mix of hearing and deaf communities that would have seemed impossible a year ago. Marcus was there, demonstrating some engineering concept to a group of deaf students through creative sign language. He'd added ASL to his degree program, planning to develop adaptive technologies. "You did this," Edward said, appearing beside her with 2 glasses of champagne. "We did this," Amara corrected. "No, you started it. That night when you chose to sign to my mother instead of just nodding and walking away. You changed everything." Chloe approached them hesitantly. She'd been sentenced to community service after testifying against Richard and had been assigned to La Couronne's accessibility program. "Amara, I wanted to apologize. Again, and to thank you for requesting leniency for me. Everyone deserves a second chance," Amara said carefully. "I'm learning," Chloe said, then signed clumsily, "Thank you." After she walked away, Edward shook his head. "You're more forgiving than I would be." "Forgiveness is its own kind of power," Amara replied. "Your mother taught me that." Speaking of Margaret, she was holding court near the dessert table, surrounded by young deaf professionals who hung on her every sign. She'd become something of an icon in the accessibility community. The executive who'd hidden in silence until someone showed her she didn't have to. "Can we talk?" Edward asked suddenly. Privately, they found a quiet corner, the city lights twinkling below them. Edward seemed uncharacteristically nervous, his usual confidence replaced with something more vulnerable. "I've been waiting," he said finally. 6 months. For the power dynamics to equalize, for you to establish yourself independently, for it to be appropriate." "Edward, let me finish. Please." He took a breath. "You asked me once if I was soft. My father's word, meaning weak. But you've taught me that soft can mean gentle, flexible, capable of change." He met her eyes. "I've changed, Amara. Because of you." "You changed yourself," she said softly. You just saw me as capable of being better. Do you know how rare that is?" To be seen not for what you are, but for what you could become. He moved closer, and Amara's breath caught. I see you too, he continued. Not the shy waitress. Not even the confident director. I see the woman who stood between my mother and champagne, who translated brutal truths without flinching, who faced down my father on this very rooftop. What are you saying? I'm saying that I've fallen completely, inappropriately, inconveniently in love with you. The words tumbled out, so unlike his usual measured speech. And I'm asking, hoping, that maybe you feel something similar? Amara thought of all the reasons this was complicated. The publicity it would bring, the questions about her qualifications, the people who would say she'd planned this all along. Then she thought of mornings in the penthouse, Edward learning new signs over coffee, Margaret teaching her the family recipes, insisting she'd need them someday, Marcus and Edward debating technology late into the night. A family formed not by blood but by choice. Yes, she said simply. Yes, I feel something similar. Edward's smile was radiant, boyish, nothing like the cold businessman she'd first met. He leaned in, then stopped. May I? Instead of answering, Amara kissed him, soft and sweet and full of promise. When they pulled apart, applause erupted. They turned to find the entire party watching, Margaret at the front, beaming. Finally, Marcus called out, Do you know how painful it's been watching you two dance around each other? How long have you all known? Amara asked, mortified. Margaret signed with a mischievous smile. Since the night you took champagne in the chest for me. Edward looked ready to destroy anyone who hurt you. Mother, Edward protested, but he was laughing. The party continued around them, but Amara and Edward stayed in their corner, fingers intertwined, watching the mix of people their journey had brought together. The threatening messages stopped, Amara noted, after Richard's second arrest. Cascade Industries withdrew completely. They're under federal investigation now. Edward squeezed her hand. We're safe. Are we ever really safe? No, Margaret said, approaching with a glass of wine. She signed as she spoke, but that's not the point. The point is what we do with the time we have. Very philosophical, Mother. Very true, Margaret corrected. Then, to Amara, welcome to the family, officially. We're not. Yet, Edward and Margaret said in unison. Later, as the party wound down, Amara found herself signing with a young deaf girl, maybe 12, who'd come with her parents to see the famous Margaret Hale. Is it true, the girl signed, that you were just a waitress who changed everything? Amara thought about how to answer. I was a waitress who knew sign language. Mrs. Hale was an executive who needed someone to hear her. Mr. Hale was a CEO who needed to learn to listen. We all changed each other. Could I do that? Change things. You already are, Amara signed back. Just by being here, being yourself, showing the world that different doesn't mean less than. The girl beamed and ran back to her parents. Margaret appeared beside Amara. You're good with children. Don't start, Amara warned, but she was smiling. I'm just saying, deaf grandchildren would be perfectly fine with me. Mother, Edward groaned. We've been together for 5 minutes. 6 months, Margaret corrected. You've been together since that first night. You just took a while to admit it. As the evening ended and they made their way home, and it was home now, Amara realized the penthouse where she'd officially moved in 2 months ago. She thought about the journey from that first night at La Couronne. Her grandmother had been right. Her gift had protected her. But more than that, it had opened doors she'd never known existed, created a family she'd never expected, and brought love she'd never dared hope for. What are you thinking? Edward asked as they entered the penthouse, his signs much smoother now. That grandma would have loved this, Amara signed back. All of it. Tell me about her, Margaret requested, settling into her favorite chair. I want to know everything. So Amara did, signing the story of the woman who'd raised her, who'd taught her that silence had its own language, that gifts came in unexpected forms, that strength could look like gentleness. Outside, the city hummed with life. Inside, 3 people who'd found each other through corporate espionage and sign language, and the simple act of seeing each other as human built their own kind of family. The news would report on the Hale Thompson Initiative's success, on the company's soaring profits despite the patent giveaways, on the romance between the CEO and the former waitress. But they missed the real story, how communication, in all its forms, had saved them all. A year later, at Amara and Edward's wedding, Margaret would give a speech entirely in sign language, translated by Marcus. She would talk about voice and silence, about the power of being seen, about love that transcends words. Richard would be serving a 20-year sentence. Victor, having testified fully, would be doing community service teaching sign language to business students. Cascade Industries would have collapsed under federal investigation. But that was all in the future. Tonight, in the penthouse overlooking the city, Amara signed stories while Edward practiced his improving ESL and Margaret dozed peacefully in her chair, no longer fighting to be heard because she was finally, truly understood. The shy waitress who'd hidden in shadows had found her light. The silent mother had found her voice. The cold CEO had found his heart. And together, they'd found that the most powerful language isn't spoken or signed. It's the language of respect, of inclusion, of love that sees no barriers, only possibilities. As midnight approached and Margaret headed to bed, she turned back to sign one last thing. Thank you, Amara. For everything. Thank you, Amara signed back. For trusting me with your voice. No, Margaret signed with a soft smile. For showing me I had one all along. Edward wrapped his arms around Amara as his mother disappeared down the hall. Ready for tomorrow? He asked. The Hale Thompson Initiative was launching nationally, with Amara as its primary spokesperson. With you? I'm ready for anything. He kissed her temple. That first night, when you signed to my mother, did you know it would lead to this? No, Amara said honestly. I just saw someone who needed to be heard. And now I see a future where everyone gets heard. Where silence isn't emptiness, but possibility. Where? She stopped laughing. I'm starting to sound like one of your speeches. You sound like yourself, Edward corrected. Which is perfect. As they stood together, looking out at the city that had witnessed their unlikely story, Amara thought one last time of her grandmother's words. Your gift will protect you. She'd been right, but also incomplete. The gift hadn't just protected. It had transformed, elevated, and connected. It had turned a shy waitress into a corporate director, a silent mother into a powerful advocate, and a cold businessman into a man capable of love. Most importantly, it had proven that in a world full of noise, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is help someone else be heard. If you had the power to give someone their voice back, would you use it even if it meant losing your own safety? Like and subscribe for more stories that remind us that sometimes the quietest people carry the loudest truths.